Greetings, this is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my expose on the history of the Magic the Gathering. This week, I'm talking to you about Urza's Legacy. Now, this was the second set in the Urza's block, and it was the first small expansion in the block. It was released on February 15th of 1999 and had 143 cards. It continued with all the mechanics and keywords that were in the previous set. It continued with the free spells, the sleeping and growing enchantments, both those types, and of course it continued with echo and cycling, sort of expanding upon all of these things while keeping them effectively the same. Now, its symbol was a hammer, representing Urza's continued experimentation and trying to defeat Phyrexia. Now, it was also the first set to feature foil cards in random packs, that there would occasionally be a foil card in one of the packs that was different than one of the normal, replacing it. So this was the beginning of foil cards' existence in Magic packs as a regular kind of thing. Now, this was also considered a very powerful set, and it suffered from the combo winter, just like its predecessor did, that a lot of cards that were used in, especially the block, if you're going to be playing in an Urza's block deck, are banned. Granted, some of these bans aren't lasting in the overall, thing, but it was banned in standard, and the ban stays for any kind of block-based decks you can have. There's a huge list of them if you look at the Urza's block, if you're playing it. So this blocking, though, kind of began to drove off players. Players did not like this, that they were banning these cards out, not letting people play with them, especially for Memory Jar. Memory Jar was this card that people saw and considered that there was great combos and possibly great deck ideas based around it. They were coming up with great ideas. DCI handed down a ban out of the normal turn, out of the normal order. So this was actually the only time that there's been an emergency banning in the history of Magic the Gathering. So emergency banning on Memory Jar. Now, there were some little changes to the way the cards were for mono-colored non-basic lands. There was a colored border now around the text block that kind of changed and had it stand out a little bit more. So this was a change that occurred during this set. Now, it was sold in 16-card booster packs featuring Beast of Burden on the cover. The pre-release was on February 2nd of 1999. The promo pre-release card was a Beast of Burden. Now, the story continues with Urza building a collection of artifacts and a skyship in order to continue the fight against the Phyrexians. He then takes one of his students, Joyra, and the Karn the Silver Golem, and goes to Shiv to check out the Thran mana rig there and see if they could somehow use it in the continued fight against Phyrexia. During this time, there's a Phyrexian infiltration on Tolarian Academy that his students have to effectively deal with when he's away. This set story is told in the Time Streams book. Now, as I said, some things were expanded upon in this set. Echo was expanded upon majorly, that now they introduced Echo on artifacts rather than just on creatures. And they introduced creatures that had Echo, that rather than being bigger than what its mana cost should be, that it had some kind of effect when it would come into play, and that you could pay the mana cost effectively to keep the creature in play. So there was sort of like you're casting two spells in one over a course of 2 turns. They did expand upon also sleeping enchantments too, to come up with what effectively could be called sleeping instants. What it would be a sleeping enchantment that you could put out, and at a certain point in time would be triggered, and you would sacrifice the enchantment for some kind of greater or powerful effect, effectively as if you were casting an instant at a different point in time. You were effectively saving it in play as an enchantment. Now, there were, of course, 3 cycles in this set and 1 vertical cycle. Let's talk about the 3 cycle. There was the man lands. The man lands were effectively these lands that you could tap for 1 of any color, whatever, for the cycle of colors, and also you could change them into creatures with various abilities for a mana cost. That was the cycle of them. There was a cycle of reoccurring enchantments, similar to the last set, that if the enchantment would leave the battlefield and go to your graveyard, you return it to your hand. And of course, there was a cycle of the sleeping enchantments that were rare, that were effectively those sleeping instants I was talking about, that at a certain point in time, you'd sacrifice them for a very big and very powerful effect. There was also the vertical cycle, which is a vertical cycle of carrier creatures based around Phyrexia. The carrier creatures, each of them, you could sacrifice them to give something -X, where X was its power and toughness. And they would go up from 1 to 4, so it was a vertical cycle of them. There's also a mirrored pair of knights you could get, which were a very interesting little pair. There were a couple of functional reprints, including Lava Axe. Now, as for the pre-constructed decks, there was Crusher, a green-white deck, Phyrexian's Assault, a black-red deck, Radiant's Revenge, a white-blue deck, and Time Drain, a blue-green deck. Now let's talk about some of the cards from the set. There was Avalanche Riders. Avalanche Riders was an echo creature that was a 2/2 haste that when it came into play, you destroyed target land. There was crop rotation. With crop rotation, when you played it, you had to sacrifice a land as part of its mana cost, but you could search your library for a land and put it into play. So if there's another land you wanted, different from the one you had, you could sacrifice one and switch it out. There was Deranged Hermit. He was 3 colors, 2 green, with an echo cost of 3 colors, 2 green. When he came into play, you got 4 1/1 green squirrel tokens, and he gave all squirrel creatures +1/+1 as long as he was in play. There was Goblin Welder. Goblin Welder, you could tap him. Choose a artifact that target player controls and an artifact that is in that player's graveyard. So you choose one that's in that under a player's control, one that's in that same player's graveyard, and effectively you'd switch one. You'd sacrifice the artifact that's in play, return the artifact that's in the graveyard into the battlefield simultaneously. You could use the Goblin Welder to switch artifacts. He's great in artifact decks. I forgot to mention the Deranged Hermit is great in a squirrel deck if you had a squirrel deck. There was Grim Monolith. Grim Monolith, it does not untap during your normal untap phase. You can tap it for 3 colors mana, or you can pay 4 mana to untap it. So granted, it costs you more to use it than to untap it, but if you needed to cast something big, you could use that and then recharge it later on. Or there was other ways of untapping artifact. There was Memory Jar. You could tap it, sacrifice it. Each player would exile their hand face down, then draw 7 new cards. They could do whatever they want with those 7 new cards, but at the beginning of the next end step, they would discard that hand of 7 new cards and return the cards they exiled face down to their hand. So effectively, you could be like, oh, I get rid of this, get a new hand. What can I do my turn? Get rid of that, put it back. And also, you get rid of effectively 7 cards from all your opponents. There's Mother of Runes. It's a creature that you could tap it to give target creature protection of the color of your choice until end of turn. She was very great at protecting things. I remember plenty of decks that had her. There's Palatron, a 4/5 flyer that when it came into play, you untapped 7 lands, so it was a free spell. And for 2 colorless and 2 blue, you could return it to your hand. So there was plenty of sort of combos you could have with that, especially if you had things that tap for more than 1 mana. There's Rancor. Rancor was one of the returning enchantments. It's actually one of the really good ones. Target creature gets +2/+0 and trample. And it doesn't cost you a lot. And if it should go into your graveyard from play, it returns to your hand. Rancor is still one of the really great ones out of these. Tinker. When you played Tinker, in addition to its cost, you sacrificed an artifact. You searched your library for an artifact, put it into play, and then shuffle your library. So you get rid of 1 artifact for a better artifact. There's Archivist. He is a 1/1 wizard that costs you 2 colorless, 2 blue that can tap to draw a card. Beast of Burden, which I mentioned before as the promo. It is a star artifact creature where star is equal to the number of creatures in play. So the more creatures in play, the bigger Beast of Burden is. Crawl Space. No more than 2 creatures can attack you each turn. Really good for defense. Defense of the Heart. If during the beginning of your upkeep, an opponent should have 3 or more creatures, you're allowed to sacrifice Defense of the Heart, search your library for 2 creature cards, and put them into play. Defense of the Heart is really good. I only have a few of them. They're really expensive nowadays, but I'm glad I have them. There's Engineered Play. When it comes to play, you choose a creature type. All creatures of that type gain -1/-1. Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden was replacing Black Vice from early on. Black Vice targeted 1 player. Iron Maiden says that at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, Iron Maiden deals them damage equal to X -4, where X is the number of cards in their hand. So if they have a lot of cards, effectively, if they have 5 or more, they start taking damage. Just like Black Vice. There's Knighthood. Creatures you control have first strike. Enough said. Levitation. Creatures you control have flying. Also enough said. There's Multani, Mara Sorcerer. He's a star, where star is equal to the number of cards in every player's hand. So you count up how many cards are in each player's hand, add those numbers together, that's how big he is. There's No Mercy. Whenever a creature deals damage to you, it is destroyed then. It's not just combat damage, it's whenever a creature deals damage. There's Phyrexian Plaguelord, the top of that vertical carrier list. You could tap and sacrifice him to give target creature -4/-4 until end of turn. He's also a 4/4. His other ability is where he really comes into shine. You can sacrifice a creature to give target creature -1/-1 until end of turn. Combo him with a deck that creates a lot of tokens, and you could shrink your enemy's creatures into non-existence quite rapidly. Quicksilver Amulet. 4, tap it, put a creature from your hand into the battlefield. There you go. It's an artifact that allows you just to play creature whenever. Radiant Archangel. 3/3 Flying Vigilance that gets +1/+1 for each creature with flying in play. Thran Lens. All permanents in play are colorless. Interesting little thing for something like an artifact deck. Weatherseed Treefolk. He's a 5/3 trample treefolk that should he die, he returns to his hand. So he's actually really great at coming back. So Weatherseed Treefolk with Rancor, both continue to come back. Wheel of Torture. It's the one that's replacing the rack. Just like the Iron Maiden was replacing Black Vice, this one, Wheel of Torture, replaces the rack. It's at the beginning of each of your opponent's upkeeps. They take 3 minus the number of cards they have in their hand damage. So, I mean, if they have no cards in hand, they're taking 3 at most. Again, similar to the Iron Maiden. But again, also replacing the rack with one opponent for all of them. Yavimaya Worm. It costs the exact same amount of mana as a Crawl Worm. It's a 6/4, just like a Crawl Worm. It is trample. It is an upgrade from a Crawl Worm to basically the same thing with trample. Get Yavimaya Worm instead. So that's it for today. I talked about Urza's Legacy, continuing with the combo winter, showing off a bunch of really powerful cards, which some of them are still really great now, and I would recommend getting them in your deck, because many of those aren't no longer banned, at least in Legacy. They're banned in if you're just using an Urza's deck, so they're not in Standard anymore. So I would recommend checking out some of these cards, definitely, seeing if you want them in your decks. These were sets that had a lot of power and still have staying power even to this day with some of the things they came up with. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, The Empire, and the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon, linked in the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.